Hello, and welcome to another episode of Your Brain at Work Live. We're so glad to have you back after a brief mid-season break. I'm Evan McFalls, Vice President of Marketing and Brand here at the Neuroleadership Institute. Super excited to dig in today with you. For our regulars, we're super happy to have you back, and for our newcomers, we're excited to have you here with us today for the first time. Hot on the heels of our latest publication in Fast Company, we're thrilled to kick off the year with an in-depth exploration of the key trends to watch for leadership in 2024. Before we start, I'd like to know where you're joining us from. So why don't you take a moment to update your settings in Zoom from hosts and panelists just so that you can chat to everyone and let us know where in the world you're coming from. Just so you know, I'm beaming out to you from beautiful Brooklyn in New York City. Now, while you do all that, I'm going to go over some quick housekeeping items. Firstly, for those of you who are curious, yes, we will be recording today's session and we'll make sure to send that replay to you via email later today. That email will also include a survey for feedback and a number of resources that are aligned with today's discussion. While you watch today and while you engage in the chat, I suggest that you put your phone on Do Not Disturb, quit out your email and messaging apps, and really allocate your focus to today's discussion. We really want to make sure that you're getting the most out of today's learning experience. Now, I don't want to go on for too long, so I'll just say make sure that you're spending some time engaging with one another as well as our guests for today in the chat. And in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and start introducing our folks. So firstly, I'm so thrilled to welcome somebody you know all too well, an Aussie turned New Yorker who coined the term neuroleadership when he co-founded NLI over 2 decades ago with a professional doctorate, 4 successful books under his name, and a multitude of bylines ranging from the Harvard Business Review to the New York Times and many, many more. A warm welcome to our co-founder and CEO, Dr. David Rock.
Thank you very much, Evan. Good to be here. Happy Friday to everyone. Good to be here and having a great conversation.
Thanks so much for being here, and happy Friday, David. Our next guest for today leads the research function here at the Neuroleadership Institute, translating cognitive and social neuroscience into actionable solutions for individuals and organizations alike. She's an expert at advancing access to the benefits of brain science for everyday leadership and organizational challenges, and plays a critical role in our mission to make organizations more human through science. Previously, she served as professor at Dominican College and New York University and does research at the Nathan Klein Institute. She holds a bachelor's degree from Brown University and a PhD in neuroscience from New York University. A warm welcome to our head of scientific research at NLI, Dr. Emma Sarro. Emma, I'm passing it over to you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Evan. Hey, David, Happy New Year.
To you. It's you. Good to be back. Look forward to this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So, new year, new you, new everyone. Everyone's talking about it, the trends, like what to watch, what to do, what are the next big obstacles. So we're thinking about the same thing. And Evan mentioned the recent article in Fast Company that we kind of laid out what we think are the top 5 things to watch and to think about, top 5 obstacles. Although when I think back, I think we've been talking about obstacles and crises for a while, for the last couple of years. Increased changes to work structure, the pandemic, increased awareness of DEI, all of that, employee well-being. So if you were to think about the next big one, what's the theme going into 2024?
I mean, I think it's unfortunately like a next level of uncertainty. It's almost like just when we thought we could handle the kind of uncertainty around us, life throws us a whole new one at a whole new level. And I think this year we've got kind of strong emotions on all sides, really strong emotions about the federal election. I mean, I think there's a level of panic for a lot of people on both sides of that debate. And so that's bringing huge uncertainty. Obviously, the legal things going through the system right now around January 6th, the Capitol riots, like there's a lot of tension that brings, what could happen. There's obviously the troubles in the Middle East hitting home in ways that we've never seen before, and causing strong divisions even amongst families as well as workplaces. You've got the whole DEI question and kind of the tensions around that, and are we pulling back from it, or what's happening out in the zeitgeist. And then there's the whole tension between employers and employees around workplace. Although a lot of that argument's been handled, there's still a lot of simmering tensions around all the issues of where to work. So I think, all of that together, just kind of, you almost look back lovingly on the first year of the pandemic and saying it was just one huge uncertainty. Now we've got so many, certainly probably less overwhelming day to day, but I think the overall theme is kind of uncertainty and, for everyone.
Yeah, and kind of like a compounded uncertainty, right? I mean, as you said, as we were entering the pandemic, I mean, it was a massive amount of uncertainty, but we were all feeling a similar kind of it. Now you have, different kinds of uncertainty, people coming from different perspectives. How do you react when you have, years of uncertainty building up one on top of the other, and you're still not sure what to expect? And you're right, there's any number of factors that people are experiencing right now.
Yeah.
And we know all too well what happens when you're feeling uncertain.
I think it's also compounded by this, like, during the pandemic, there was this sort of sense of we're all in it together, right? There was a sense of relatedness with everyone. We all had something in common. And I think what you have now is increasing divisions between people over various different topics, so now you have uncertainty and a lack of feeling of control and kind of what feels like more enemies. So there's a drop in a sense of relatedness as well. And so it's a combination of things that are going on. But I think, all of this is sort of a backdrop to things happening in technology as well, and in kind of workplace trends. And I think it's all kind of mushing together as sort of this is what we need to think about this year.
Yeah, which kind of gets in the way, right? I mean, even if it's an exciting new piece of technology, everyone's, generally excited about where we're going to go, but there's also uncertainty mixed in with that.
Yeah.
And we know very well that this kind of threat, without the boost of a sense of relatedness or on the same page or on the same team, you're going to be limited by how you can even, like, how open your mind is to these things, and how likely it is you're going to experiment with them and try them out. If anything, we're just going to avoid it all.
Yeah, definitely. The increased threat means less willingness to experiment, take risk. And that includes, just trying a new piece of software.
Yeah. So anyway, so as we go into all of the things we think we're really going to experience, like, what are the obstacles we have to prepare for? What are the things we need to get excited for? How do we best prepare for them? We, mapped out the 5 major things we think we're going to be approaching this year to really think about. So why don't you lay some of those out for us?
Yeah, so these are things that we're thinking about in Ally, but we're thinking about them because we're seeing everyone else thinking about them. So these are sort of priorities that we've spotted across all of the talent across the globe. These are sort of the 5 biggest things that we think seem to matter at the moment. And so we're thinking about them. I'll just sort of run through them briefly, and then we'll get into each one. The first one is just like really redefining how you want people to lead and what the skills are for leadership itself. The second one is actually how you develop those leaders. We need a complete breakthrough in that. The third one is around DEI, sort of how to make sure it's like it stays alive, doing the right kind of work, how you sort of weave it into systems. So there's a bit of a trend to make it less of a standalone kind of department and more something that's woven in. So we'll talk a bit about that. There's rethinking performance management. Again, seems to be a perennial topic, but performance management in this environment is an interesting topic. And then finally, just the one that everyone's thinking about a lot is AI transformation, and thinking about like how to do that right from if you're in the talent function, how do you sort of think about AI transformation just right? So those are the 5 topics overall.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting because as you laid out the last one, I mean, obviously that's a weave throughout all of them. I mean, as we think about, what the best kind of leader is, like, they also need to be able to be ready to integrate AI or use it well. They can't be afraid of it. As you think about how you develop leaders, that we best utilize AI as we develop them. So all of these are things that we're seeing in the data as we're looking at the industry reports, the marketing reports. Like, these are things that people are starting to talk about. So they absolutely will be something we have to approach and think about more fully and understand better as we do here. So we think about leaders. I mean, they're who, role model for organizations. They get their teams to best performance. So how is the leader different now? Like, what are the skills, like the top 3 skills that you would see in a leader now that might have not been so much previously?
So we started doing this new in-person format about 9 months ago, which which we started to do because we wanted to go deeper into specific topics. And we did one on growth mindset. We called it a mini summit. So we started doing a growth mindset mini summit, which gave us a real opportunity to dig much more deeply into the kind of 10 years of research and practice we've done and how to do it. Then we did one on psych safety. And then recently we started to do one on leadership development. And that's been fascinating. And I've been leading a lot of those. We did one in London and one in San Francisco and a few places. And one of the things we've been doing is asking a lot of questions because we're trying to get smarter as well. And but, you know, one of the questions is sort of sounds like an obvious question, but it's an important one. Like, how much does leadership actually need to change? Like, do we need to throw everything out, start again? Is it a 5% tweak? You know, what is it? And, you know, really interesting feedback. And we collected a lot of data on this, although we haven't published yet. But essentially, like, about 50% of what leaders do needs to be really different. And, you know, the other 50% that needs to stay the same, people need to be much better at it. Like those foundational skills of setting expectations and, you know, having good feedback conversations, like all that stuff, you know, that's become even more important. So it's the same skill, but it's become more important and it's harder to do. And then there are a bunch of new skills that are happening, like, you know, leading through AI transformation and, you know, leading when people are completely, you know, overwhelmed and exhausted. And, you know, so it's definitely some new skills. And then the existing skills people need to be much better at. They're harder overall. So that's been some of the kind of trends that we've seen. You know, if I was to mention sort of specific skills, it's definitely you know, AI transformation is definitely one. You know, leading in a hybrid environment, in a long-term hybrid environment is definitely one, and that's different for different companies, right?
Yeah.
Some are really hybrid and really flexible, and some, you know, have gone to, like, you know, 4 days a week in the office. But whatever it is, leading through that time is a big theme. And you know, also reskilling. So thinking about reskilling and upskilling and all of that. So it's definitely some new skills out there. I think one of the we sort of anchored on 3 broad capabilities that leaders need today in much higher levels than they've needed before. And it's interesting. There's sort of a 3-legged tripod. How do you do a tripod? 3 legs. There we go. A 3-legged tripod. And you sort of have to have all 3. You know, one of them is growth mindset. We've been talking about that a long time. So what does that mean? And today it means really having a very you're not just open to new ideas, but you're voraciously exploring new ideas. You're voraciously like trying to find you know, the best way of doing something. So you're really you're not closed, or you're not just open. You're like really interested. So it's even maybe it's more than a growth mindset. It's a extreme growth mindset.
Growth mindset, mindset around like extreme experimentation. And you know what's interesting about growth mindset is it never ends. I mean, so that's given that, you know, we will always have another obstacle. And we talked about this a lot when we talked about psych safety, is anticipating the next obstacle. There will always be another obstacle. And the growth mindset is just going to change what its focus is on. So now it's, you know, leading with AI, or, you know, like leading in, you know, in the world of uncertainty and with like increased divisiveness. How do you form those connections? So leaders can never take a break from having a growth mindset, essentially.
Yeah, it's become more important this year, not less important. So growth mindset continues to be important, but you also there's sort of another leg, which is, you just mentioned psychological safety, which you think of as creating the conditions for people to really share their ideas, challenge each other in really productive ways, you know, make sure the best possible ideas are winning, not the loudest voices. So, you know, it's similar to some elements of inclusion. It's similar to some elements of speaking up, but it's its own unique set of skills that leaders need to have. And it's probably the biggest insight I've had from our work with Amy Edmondson is that it's a very high order skill, like a high level skill. It's more than just making people feel okay. It's like creating the conditions for people to really say what's on their mind and really, you know, speak up. And you know, I had a conversation this week with a team member who you know, I won't mention who, but who I felt was like, just was a little bit off, was okay, but just like something was really troubling them. And, you know, I made some time and, you know, sat down and said, you know, hey, look, I really would love to understand, you know, what's going on for you. Is it something, you know, if it's something personal, you don't need to tell me, I don't need to know, but if it's something personal at home, let me know. If it's something, that happened in the team. Most likely, I'm guessing it's something that I did. I'd love to know what it was so I can like learn from it. And it was something that I'd done, but it was something we could have a really, relatively easy conversation about. And we addressed it and we fixed it, and there was some misunderstandings and some things that needed to be handled differently. But it's very intentional conversation that really working hard to create the space for someone to share things. So psych safety is such a critical sort of second piece. If you think of growth mindset as about sort of the business side, psych safety more about the human side. But then that has to be tempered with the third one, which is an increasing theme for us. We're doing some research on this, which is accountability. So the third one is how do you, experimenting a lot, really taking care of people, but also making sure things happen. And so those three themes, I think, are the critical ones for 2024: growth mindset, psych safety, accountability, and kind of all of them in equal measure in some ways. And it is possible to do that.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think you're absolutely right on that they're all like intermixed. I mean, when we did all of this work on psych safety, we realized that psych safety and a growth mindset are necessarily intermingled, essentially, like they're interwoven. When you create a sense of psych safety, you're able to embrace a growth mindset better. And you have to embrace a growth mindset to engage in this really difficult skill, which is psychological safety, or creating it. And it's difficult. So having a difficult conversation with an employee or just with a friend, you need to feel that sense of psychological safety. And it's not necessarily going to feel great. And that was one of my insights when working with Amy Edmondson is the difficulty that takes to continue this environment of psychological safety, because you will have to be okay disagreeing and sharing where you're uncomfortable. And as a leader, to share where you don't know what's going on, or like the next step, and I'm not sure the best decision to make, for instance, and sharing that with your team is really difficult. But then, and I, we talked a bit before this about how psychological safety was one of the highlighted environments that we thought we needed to create in the midst of the pandemic when everyone was feeling uncertain. But with that, we might have lost the ability to understand how important accountability is. And so now I think everyone's kind of coming back together, and they want to maintain this sense of psychological safety. But how can we do that and still hold our employees accountable, be accountable to them? And we're kind of understanding the science of accountability and how it's a two-way street. So as a leader, you need to be accountable to your team so that they can also be accountable back to you. I think so. And growth mindset is mixed in with all of that as well.
Yeah, we have an interesting session coming up. We were going to do it today at one point. We had some scheduling challenges, but in a couple of weeks, we're going to do another session with Amy Edmondson on the show. And we're going to dig directly into growth mindset, psych safety and accountability, and the sort of tensions and connections between the two. So we're going to come back to that. And we've also been doing some kind of new research on accountability that's being woven into the new LEAD solution that we've done, which is this 6-month digital experience. Just a quick aside before we change gears. Speaking of growth mindset, I love what our team did around the in-person mini summit. I had no idea we were doing that. I love it. Just to put a point to that, I think it's the second last thing in the chat. If you're in a city and you don't have access to an in-person event with us, we're starting to do more in-person events this year. We're calling them a mini summit on particular topics. Could be growth mindset, psych safety, leadership development, overall other things. But if you are in a city and interested, just fill in that form. Thanks for the kind words, Millie. Let's maybe go to the second one. But I think this first one's important. Like we need a different definition of what it is to lead today. And there are definitely some new skills, but there are also maybe half our existing skills that we need to be much better at.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, if you think about, we've talked a lot about this, like crisis in like where, like how many leaders we have. I mean, sustaining leaders in positions and making sure that they're able to successfully lead their teams. And so we have this leadership pipeline crisis kind of going on, and we need to fill it. But, how do we develop them? And currently what we have are these like very long multi-day offsites, and who has time for that? Like very extensive content libraries that honestly leaders, like none of us have time for that really. Like everyone's like on the verge of burnout. So how do we kind of like integrate the training that's needed to develop these skills, knowing that leaders have to change the skills that they have and amp up what they're doing in their positions, and in a way that's like seamless seamless within the workplace,
Mhm.
or like doesn't take too much time away from their team. So how do we develop that kind of training that also builds and embeds like very strong habits?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think leadership development itself needs a massive disruption. It needs to be massively disrupted. It's one of the most inefficient things that exists, right? And if you think about it, you sort of go, it's got the longest gap between kind of impasse to insight, right?
Yeah.
For me, behavior change, habit activation, culture change, so many things are about this
Yeah.
impasse to insight thing.
Yeah.
And you have a leader who's like not running great meetings, right? Is not addressing conflict well or something. You're in an impasse where they're not able to like get a team motivated. And how long does it take to get the insight to change that behavior, right? At the moment, it's like years,
Maybe. Yeah,
right?
if we
Months
haven't
or
at
years.
all.
It's like the dominant model is these, the offsite, and I know all the business schools have great solutions here, and CCL and a number of other firms have great solutions, but it's massively inefficient, very expensive, and you're talking about months or years to go from impasse to insight, right? Or the other option is you try to fix that gap by giving people self-study, self-service tools, and there's been this big growth in Harvard Managed Mentor and Skillsoft and all these things where you sort of go in and try to find your answer. There's a lot of problems with that. The biggest one being that the more someone needs help, generally, the less they self-serve that kind of help. And you get this tremendous muddle across, hundreds of different thought leaders and different frames. So both of those two things aren't really working. There's the third thing that sort of emerged as a big trend, which is more the digital coaching. That's getting some momentum. That has some different challenges. It's very personal. So you're not building relationships between people. You're not building team. You're not improving team dynamics, right? So at an individual level, you're getting that. You also can't force a coach on someone. So that's interesting. So we've been thinking like, where's the real disruption in, that's possible. If you've been following us for a while, you've heard about a new strategy we've been working on. It's a 6-month experience. Across 2 months just on managing yourself, 2 months on mobilizing others, 2 months on driving results. And it's been a fascinating journey putting this together. And we're already starting to talk to lots and lots of organizations about kind of how to embed this and roll it out. And interesting, a lot of firms are saying, well, actually, we want to do a 2-day experience 3 times and just have the digital behind it. We're like, okay, we can do that, massively increase the cost and reduce the scalability. But we actually think a really well executed, completely digital strategy will be very, very, very strong. It will be very strong. And now you can scale that to 1,000 leaders, really fast. So there is a way. The question is like, what can you experiment with and what can you let go of? And for us, we think about that question all the time. Our mantra is follow the science, experiment, follow the data, right? So what can you let go of? Like, you can let go of pretty much everything to do with how you get people to learn. Like, it doesn't matter what the modality is or what the tool or what the technology. The question is, how much do people change inside their head, right? It's, learning happens inside the brain. And that the active ingredient of that is the moment of insight, right? Is the moment where someone goes, wow, I really didn't know that was important, like a really strong insight. So what you're really solving for in leadership development is the creation of strong insight. We know if that insight happens in a social context, it's radically more accessible, memorable, applicable. And we know if we do that over time, the positive pressure of that, the normative effects really help. So we've been designing to that. And I think you can loosen up a lot of bonds. You can build a leadership experience that's based on podcasts that people send out and listen together. You can do it based on all sorts of things. But I think I'm excited to see all the lessons we're going to learn and what we're going to learn by sort of, going into this different world. But you can't let go of insight. So you have to have strong insight. Whatever you're doing with leadership development, people must be having strong insights. It must be social in some way. You can't strip out the social and just have someone, watch a video or in their own, because so much of the dynamic is, or what makes new skills stick is people practicing them together and learning them together and going, okay, I'm going to do this now, and over time. So anyway, we're excited to see what's possible, learning a heap. And I'll just, if you're from an organization and you're interested in learning more about this solution, it's the first time we've put all our IP into one leadership experience. Just put the word lead in the chat and someone will follow up with you. Otherwise, my team, if you've already done that in previous events, we've probably caught up with you at some point. But if you haven't, just put the word lead, and someone will follow up and send you some resources and have a chat. We can do a demo of what it is. But essentially, it's a 6-month completely digital experience that you can scale to every level of people manager very quickly. But we believe it's going to be more effective than in-person training. It's a bold statement, but we believe we've cracked it.
Yeah, I mean, but I think because I think we've kind of pulled the most important things about like what really drives like strong learning. So like, how do you best motivate someone to go through the program? One of the things that we lose with some of these other leadership trainings is like the motivation to do it. So you have this like social pressure, you have this like maybe a bit of gamification, you have like the short time that they're learning, and you have the insights that we know are incredibly motivational. So all of those mixed in together, you have this steady motivational drive to continue learning. And as you're kind of encouraging and designing based on insight, like individuals are going to continue coming back. They're going to learn the most important skills. And we put most of our IP in here in some way because it's all critical for each of the specific features that leaders need, some of which we already talked about, and there's much more in there that we'll cover over the next few months and talk about. But it's really exciting. But leadership,
I know you're super excited about it because you're leading the build. We've got a big team. It's like 20 people.
A lot of material. Yeah, we're all, the whole company is behind this, and trying to make sure it's the best that it can be. So it's exciting for all of us.
Yeah, so I think there's lots of other people working on innovations. I think we're onto something that could be a really big breakthrough. And essentially, it's something much cheaper, much faster, much more scalable, and much better than putting people into in-person training, like the offsites and retreats. So we're hoping this could be a major disruption. Just one other thing, and maybe my team can put this in the chat. For the first time, we're actually doing open enrollment of some of our work. We never normally do that, aside from the coaching programs, but we're actually starting that in about a month from now. We're going to be kicking off a program. I think we've got 30 or so people already registered for that. That first batch will close off soon, and we'll open another. But just my team can put in the chat. There's a link. It'll start roughly mid-February, and you can actually register your place. There we go. Thanks, Evan. But let's go on to the next topic. So, just to summarize these two, leadership does need to change, but how we develop leaders also needs to change. And I think this year, 2024, we're going to see really big breakthroughs in both of these areas. But let's go to the third topic.
Yeah. So I think the third thing that you brought up is just how we weave the diversity, equity, and inclusion programs into organizations. So some organizations are, putting a lot of resources into it, and some organizations seem to be like not so sure. There's like a bit of uncertainty around how to weave it in, how to encourage or motivate individuals to dive into those programs. There is like, what happens, there's a bit of uncertainty and maybe fear around what happens if you amplify or put a DEI stamp on it. So I think like the trend is, how do we best weave it into the leadership training so that it kind of like, flows into the whole organization?
Well, it's got to be woven into priorities, habits, and systems, right? It's got to be, so DEI needs to get woven into everything. And we've seen a number of organizations make this change where, their leadership development is inclusive leadership. For example, it's anchored around inclusive leadership, not just, sort of, you've got to do this other program. This isn't just about training programs. It's really about how DEI becomes a priority that's woven into the fabric of everyday practice, how the habits of DEI are woven into all practices, and then continuing to work on the systems. I'm not necessarily an advocate for kind of closing down the DEI function, but we're seeing it out there a little bit, but we're also seeing equally some organizations doubling down and investing more because they're seeing some pushback. We did some analysis of this at our summit, and there was a huge bump in DEI investment, and then it sort of came down a bit, but it's not going back to where we were at all. It's just that actually what's happened is there's a big bump, and it just kind of the curve actually slowed, but it's not going backwards. People think that it's going back to where we were, but it's just slowed down, but it's actually still going forward. the investment and the impact. So that's been interesting. We did a session. It was probably the most fascinating session I've ever sat through with Kenji Yoshino at our summit. We might have I don't know if we have the video of that we can share, or a podcast of it. We should, Evan, get a podcast just of that session, I think. But he was talking specifically as really the world's smartest thinker on DEI and law. He was talking about the implications of the legal issues happening, and he talked about a couple of things that, to be honest, we've been doing already for the last 7 or 8 years in this space, but a couple of things that you really have to take into account. One is that any investment in DEI, you want to you want to make sure it's something that can help everyone, that you're not singling out audiences. Oh, there we go. Thanks, Evan. So you're not singling out audiences. You're kind of making this available to everyone, so no one feels excluded, and all those people are getting resources and all this. I think that's a really important piece. There's a few things. There's a lot of work's got to be done on making it more relevant to business. So business case, business relevant. So some of that's got to happen. And I think there's a few other things that Kenji was talking about. We're working on a piece on this. So I think we may do a whole session in the next few weeks with our head of DEI on this topic. But there are 2 or 3 things that you can do to, if you want to continue to invest aggressively in DEI, there's 2 or 3 things that you can do that can really make sure that doesn't get kind of cut out. One of the big things is just like, if you're gonna directly address, some things that create outgroup, some things that make people feel excluded, those things are going to be problematic. So it's a complicated topic. Janet Stovall, our head of DEI, and runs our DEI practice externally as well, will come on and talk more about this. But I do think we're seeing some companies say, let's make sure this is integrated into everything as kind of a safety net in case there are legal changes. And I think that's that's probably a healthy thing to start thinking about.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it comes back a bit to how do you motivate businesses to make these decisions? And how do you make sure the motivation, maybe it's different depending on like who is making those decisions, who is decision maker of the organizations, like, are they motivated by business outcomes? Are they motivated by something else? And so maybe it's a bit of how to change that motivation to make sure we see the business benefits of integrating those programs.
Yeah, that's a big trend. It's been interesting to see kind of what happens this year. But as I said, it's not going back to where it was. It's just that we're not in this level, and now we're more kind of at this level is what we're seeing from the data so far.
Yeah. Well, so anyways, let's move on because we're moving through here. Thinking about performance management, especially now, this is a continuous challenge for organizations, especially as we change like where the workplace is. So where are you? Are you hybrid? Are you at home? All of those things are going to affect how easy it is to assess performance. And so this is a continuous challenge for managers. I mean, how do you see the performance if you're not seeing the individual? And how do you not survey them? Because that also decreases engagement. So all of these factors that managers and leaders are balancing. So keeping engagement high, not surveying them, but you're not seeing them. And how do you assess performance and bringing in accountability, which is necessarily linked to the whole piece. So how do we change that to address the hybrid workplace?
Yeah, it's interesting. It feels like 10 years ago, and 10 years ago there was this movement that was kind of our fault around. When I say our fault, we sort of kicked it off, which was the movement to move away from ratings and onto like focusing on the conversations. Right. And the last 10 years that's happened a lot, sort of depending how you define ratings and all this stuff. There's been some interesting developments in the space, but what we've seen now is there's these other kind of big changes out in the world that are forcing companies to look at it again. And one is the companies, I think there's the insidious side of this, slightly insidious, is like companies preparing for the fact that they might need fewer people and wanting to know who they're going to let go of, right? So there's a little bit of like, hey, we need to know better information about performance. in case AI is going to help us downsize a lot, right? That's the sort of insidious side of it. There's a little bit of that going on. There's also like, hey, managers don't see 20, 50, 100% of their people anymore. How do they do performance management? In this environment, so there's the hybrid thing, right? Then there's like the increased pressure on many companies to perform. So there's this accountability factors. There's all these sort of different factors saying companies are taking a fresh look at performance. I just got an email this morning from a company like, we need to really think about this very differently. And I think this is going to be a big trend this year. We're seeing a lot of interest in this space. For me, if there's one thing to really get right, it's the feedback conversations, which are one of 6 conversations in a performance framework. And to Paul's point, it should be performance development. We're redoing our framework at the moment. We're calling it performance development within a solution called Thrive. So we're building a Thrive strategy, and performance development is a piece of Thrive at NLI. But it's the components of performance development is still like goal setting, everyday feedback, check-ins, end of cycle conversations, career conversations, and compensation conversations. And you've got to kind of, that hasn't changed. So there are still 6 main conversations, right? The biggest one to solve for, the strong first, is the everyday feedback conversations. And we've talked about this a lot in this podcast, that the way you do that is you build a culture of asking for feedback. And you really focus on getting everyone asking for feedback, because generally when you do that and they ask well, they actually have a positive experience, and they do it again and get others to do it, and becomes this wonderful thing. So that's a big trend. So we're seeing increased interest in developing cultures of asking for feedback. We did that with Microsoft, developed a solution called Perspectives. We did that with Accenture, developing what they called Well, Better, Next. But we also have some off-the-shelf work around kind of just building that skill for asking for feedback. So I think that's a big one. The other one is goal setting. It's probably the second most important one, is getting goal setting right, shifting from annual complex SMART goals to maybe quarterly stretch goals. More dynamic, more flexible is probably the better move as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're both so interwoven. I mean, having regular check-in conversations that encourage regular feedback, asking for feedback, making sure that everyone is kind of on the same page, and there's, where are you in your development process, as opposed to waiting. And we all know what happens when we try to assess somebody after months of not knowing what's going on. We forget what's going on. We only see 5 of the 10 data points. And so we're not really sure, what perspectives to get, like what data points to use. And so we do get a lot of questions from organizations of exactly what to do to know exactly who is doing well and who isn't, and who to improve and who not to. So I think a combination of, many conversations and setting great goals and checking in on those goals often, you'll be able to catch anything veering off of that trajectory a lot sooner, and kind of get them back on track.
Yeah, that's a big one. And it's interesting. Like asking for feedback actually does lots of things all at once, right? It gives you much more rich data about how people are doing. They feel developed, right? People improve weekly. But it's also one of the best ways of activating a growth mindset. Like if you ask for feedback, you're actually getting much more learning and development going. But it also creates psychological safety. So you actually got 2 of the 3 things that are really important, achieved by kind of one habit. And so I think a really interesting habit to get into as a leader is ask one person once a week. Like put it in your calendar until it's an automatic reflex. Like every week, ask one person for feedback. I started I'll tell you a quick story. We started doing offsites a bit more, like the CEO and the top team, like a day and a half or 2 days. We started doing more of these sessions where we're getting everyone more aligned, but also like giving them some really good tools for working together, for reducing bias. And I ran one recently with a mid-sized tech firm, and the 2 things that I thought were really fascinating and useful, so useful. One was we actually unpacked about half a dozen of their decisions that had gone horribly wrong, let's say, and like investment decisions and buying different businesses and strategizing. So we looked at about half a dozen of the biggest mistakes they'd made. And as a team, after teaching them our bias framework, the SEEDS model, we unpacked why they had made those mistakes. And for several of them, for a bit more than half of them, we saw that actually they would have made a different decision. They could have made a different decision if they'd applied some different thinking. But for about 30 or 40% of them, it was like there was just no way to avoid that oncoming train. Like it was just they couldn't have known, you know. So it's really interesting to do that. That was I think that gave everyone some really big insight into how to, you know, work together going forward. But the other thing I think was even more meaningful was teaching everyone to ask for feedback in real time. And it's not just like, hey, give me some feedback. There's actually some skills and some really helpful schemas to make that work. Teaching everyone and then like getting everyone to do it, like getting the whole team for a couple of hours to practice on each other and really get this deep connection going. And honestly, we came out of this session after a couple of hours, it was a completely different team. It was like, this is the team that was like really bonded, really trusting each other, had worked through so many things. It was like, it was kind of like magic. So I just think the asking for feedback habit done well. Such a powerful tool.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talk about this often. I'm surprised we haven't brought Scarf up yet in our conversation, but asking for feedback hits on all of the best pieces of our motivation. Like we're motivated, we get this like social boost from, you know, being able to ask someone like a specific question about what we're getting feedback on and having the autonomy to choose when we ask somebody for feedback. We get this social boost. And then the person that you're asking also is rewarded socially by doing that. I mean, oh, you want my feedback. I get this relatedness boost. I get this status boost from, oh, they value my feedback. So the whole conversation, even though we think going into a feedback conversation, we're anxious about it, we're nervous about it because what are they going to say? What are they not going to like about us? But the whole conversation ends up being incredibly motivating because you're both getting fed these like social motivational like reactions. And so then you leave like what the story you're talking about, David, you're leaving this experience feeling really good. And that's because you've just been like flooded with like these like motivational neurochemicals and you feel rewarded for even having the conversation. So you're more likely then to go back and ask the same person or somebody else like a similar kind of question. But you're right. There are like very specific ways to ask this. You can't go into a conversation and just say, can you give me feedback? It has to be very specific.
Yeah. So I think, you know, I think as we think about trends for this year, you know, if PM is really important to you, getting this asking for feedback culture, from my perspective, is such a foundational piece. It's a real thing to work on, but also growth mindset, like getting everyone to have a growth mindset on this, you know, super important. Let's go to the final one, I guess. The big one on everyone's mind.
Yeah, this is the one that, and we've been bringing it up in just about every single one of the trends. It's on everyone's mind. And the way I feel about it is if you're still preparing for it, you're a bit behind. This is just the AI transformation. So it's upon us. Organizations need to think about how they can integrate it to increase efficiency, to increase the output, productivity of their organization as a whole. But then with that comes all of this uncertainty about like what is going to happen. Employees have uncertainty about their own jobs. What skills do I need to learn? How leaders have uncertainty about how to best integrate it. What's going to happen when we do? What's the best service to use? So yeah, so it's a big level of uncertainty. So what's coming up for you about that? Yeah,
so I in the last 6 months, I spent a lot more time with CEOs in groups. Have a collaboration with an organization called CCI, and I think I did 5 or 6 different groups of CEOs for half a day, each group of like 15 to 20 CEOs. So I spent a lot of time listening, and every session that we did, there was a lot of discussion about AI and people presenting kind of their approach to it. So I feel like I've been immersed in kind of how particularly mid-sized companies, but also larger companies are approaching it, and people are being really thoughtful. Companies are being really thoughtful and intentional about how to approach this now. And you know, a lot of what they're doing in the first instance is sort of things that power up their internal teams. So whether it's a bot that you can, you know, ask, you can find anything much faster. You know, using an internal bot, that's happening a lot. Obviously powering people up with ChatGPT or other tools to like research faster, produce, content faster. But there's a big lesson in there in that you still really need human oversight in most processes, right? So you can speed things up, but this is augmented intelligence, not just pure artificial intelligence. If you're doing marketing or sales or, and I think we've all had this experience of reading something and going and laughing and going, yep, that was created by ChatGPT. I can see that was, and we kind of switch off, right? And that's just going to get worse, right? We'll kind of switch off when we see stuff coming across our desk that was obviously produced by AI. So I think there's a few factors there. We've been having some really fascinating insights, experimenting with some bots ourselves, and we've launched I haven't launched yet, but we're putting the finishing touches on a digital. We're actually calling it neuro-intelligent leadership enhancer, or NILES, neuro-intelligent, as opposed to just artificial intelligence. So it builds on artificial intelligence, but it's essentially putting all our research into AI. So everything we publish, all our guides, tools, papers, books, webinars, videos, everything, putting it into different kinds of bots for different purposes, so that you can have a neuro-intelligent coach help you, with a leadership challenge. Hey, I'm having conflict with this person. This is what happened. What should I do? And NILES can actually coach you really well. We actually trained NILES in our whole coaching methodology, which is really scary. But NILES will actually coach you really well to have your own insights with the science as a background, 24/7 on any leadership challenge. Or we have another one, which is basically you can use NILES to practice any leadership skill you're trying to build. So if you're trying to get better at asking for feedback, you can use NILES to actually practice that. It'll set up some scenarios for you, and it's mad. So it's really amazing, some of the sort of really cool things that you can do. And NILES is going to be part of our lead solution, but we're starting to imagine maybe organizations will just kind of add this completely separately as a digital coach. So we're experimenting with that. Probably the most provocative thing I've heard in AI, and if you're at the summit, this was sort of one of the highlights of the summit, was this guy Theodore, who I call him a guy. He's a very experienced senior surgeon who teaches other surgeons at a major hospital at Stanford, and he'd been working quietly for 20 years on essentially trying to do for the operating room what the black box recorder does for airplanes, right? So essentially recording everything, so if anything goes wrong, you can unpack it and learn and improve. So he's been building a black box recorder for operating rooms. He's now got them out there 20 years later, and they're finding they're saving lives every place that they put this in. They're saving quite a few lives every year, and huge amounts of money. But essentially, it's and I think Evans just put this in the chat if you're interested in this amazing session. But he's collecting 1 million data points a day, all video, audio, but also heart rate monitors, all this other stuff, and 1 million data points a day, and you just couldn't do anything with that without AI. But AI will bring out these patterns, and there's a couple of sort of big insights from that session. One was like, distractions are really bad, but quiet is also bad. Like, quiet is dangerous. If people aren't like speaking up and challenging each other, and like if there's not a good level of sort of communication, it's really dangerous. So yeah, we did a podcast with Dr. Grancharov specifically on this recently that we've just shared as well. But this is like AI just completely changing the game for the operating room, in that they're building totally new practices that are saving money, saving lives, all sorts of things. And it's a really fascinating case. So, and I think there's sort of, there's improving existing systems with AI, and then there's just completely blowing out like what's possible.
Yeah.
As he's done, it's completely blowing out what's possible. I think companies are, doing both at once.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see what the huge things are, the big, moonshot, projects are, a bit like us and NILES. And then there's like, how do we make our salespeople more effective as well? And so they're sort of working on both fronts at the moment. But the final thing I'll say on this is that with any change, you've got to remember you're dealing with humans. Yeah. And essentially AI exists because our ability to make decisions is pretty limited, but our ability to integrate and apply a faster intelligence than us is going to hit that bottleneck of our own intelligence, right? So we just have to recognize there's going to be a lot of pushback. There is a lot of pushback, on, as we install these systems, not just because people don't want to lose their job. There's just a lot of pushback overall for,
Yeah.
due to limited resources.
Yeah, absolutely. They're uncertain and they're not sure what it will mean for them. So there's that like lack of like understanding of how this will impact me. But I have a question. So in terms of your, like in your conversations with the CEOs, when they were thinking about how to integrate AI within their organizations, were they were feeling relatively like positive and intentional about how it will impact their employees? Is that was one of the decision points for them? I'm
I
assuming.
think they're all seeing that they'll probably need fewer employees at some point. They're not there yet, but they're all seeing that possibility, and anxious about that.
Yeah.
But they're also all seeing that everyone can be accelerated. So they're all, at the moment, they're working generally working on like increasing everyone's productivity,
Yeah.
increasing everyone's performance with AI. And then I
Yeah.
think maybe this year we'll start to see companies going, all right, well, we don't really need as many people.
Yeah.
You've certainly seen some evidence of that in a few places, some of the bigger consulting firms, for example. But that hasn't hit yet. It might hit later this year. We'll see those waves of reskilling that are necessary.
Mhm.
So that's kind of
Yeah, the reskilling is, and that'll be something we'll think about. So how can you keep the employees you have and reskill them to ways that work?
Yeah, it's a big one. So yeah, lots of things happening this year. I think in summary, we need to think about leadership really differently. We're doing a number of projects to define leadership in a simple, sticky model, and really like build a next generation leadership model. There's a lot of movement and energy around just really disrupting how leaders are developed, and lots of fascinating experiments there. DEI needs to get much more embedded so it stays in the organization no matter what happens there, and there are ways to think about that. PM is going to evolve this year in a lot of ways, and I think the asking for feedback piece is a power tool. And then finally, we've got to think about AI transformation in some really intentional ways. So those are some of the big themes overall, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's all pretty exciting, despite the fact that we started with this like over cloud of uncertainty. I think it looks pretty exciting on my end going into 2024.
Yeah, it's going to be an amazing year. We're thrilled to have the opportunity to have an influence out there, and if we can help you follow the science and experiment and follow the data in any way, let us know. We're doing a lot of research briefings, so companies are calling us to say, how do we rethink developing leaders, or how do we think about AI differently, or so we're doing a lot of these research briefings at the moment, and reach out to us if that's of interest. And then just a final plug for LEAD. About this time next month, about the middle of the month, we'll be launching the first open enrollment version of LEAD with a really fun cohort of people. So just get into that link and take a look around. Probably every week you'll see developments to that. We're putting demos and videos, and we're getting closer to finishing it. So you'll see more and more content on that website every week or so. But thanks, Emma, for a great conversation. Always fantastic. Thanks, Evan, the team behind the scenes, and welcome back to what should be an exciting year.
Yeah. Thanks, David.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, David and Emma, for such a wonderful session today. Folks, before you head out, I have so many exciting announcements for you. One of them being that we are taking our leadership development mini summits on tour. I'm going to share a couple of links. Our first stops this year are going to be in Austin, Texas, San Francisco, and Boston, Massachusetts. Just one moment, I'll share that link with you. Now, don't be disheartened if you didn't see your city on that list just yet. We are actively seeking out new places to host these mini summits. So if you're interested in having a mini summit in your community, go ahead and submit your interest to the link I just shared. It will take you to a survey where you can say, hey, I'd like to have a mini summit in my city. So please go ahead and take some time to fill that out. If you enjoyed today's show, we really, really appreciate it when you spread the word. If you could just take a moment to share our podcast out. I shared that link in the chat. Our podcast is available on all major streaming services. So wherever you want to listen, you can do that. And we We often add a little bit more information to these shows, so we hope that you'll enjoy those. And finally, I want to make sure that in case you didn't see that link for registering for LEAD, our next cohort starts on February 15th. It's filling up very quickly. We will announce another cohort soon, but you want to get into this first one. So please visit neuroleadership.com/lead if you're interested in registering for that program. And with that said, we're wrapping things up. As we close out today, as you exit the Zoom, you will be redirected to a survey for feedback. This will also allow you to let us know of any needs that you would like for us to help you sort out. So if you're an organization or an individual looking for new learning programs, you can let us know in that survey. And with that said, it's a great pleasure to welcome you all back. Happy New Year, and I'm looking forward to a fabulous 2024. That all said, farewell and see you next week. Same time, same place. Take care, all.